All right, welcome back to VersaTroll. So shout out to my arch nemesis Carmine in the comments last time who called me the witch at Endor, which honestly, fair assessment. I guess the long hair doesn't help, but to be clear, I'm not going to cut it. My husband likes my long hair, and I'm not out here summoning prophets. I'm just digging through archaeology and old dusty texts, okay? You mentioned Yahweh having a wife one time, and suddenly you're casting spells and talking to Samuel's ghost. Come on, really? But yeah, if you're wondering why I look like an actual human this time instead of the animated version, it's because I decided to start showing up in person. The AI voice was fun, but I think it's time people see there's a real person behind all this blasphemy. Don't worry, the sarcasm and heresy are still the same, just with slightly worse lighting and probably worse audio. But we work with what we got, so. All right, so I found something that's going to make a lot of believers very uncomfortable, but it is real. We all know people say the Bible's about one God, right? The God, Yahweh. Ancient Israel didn't start out monotheistic, not even close. Here's the part that shocks people. Yahweh, the God of the Bible, may not have always been alone. Ancient evidence shows he was worshipped alongside a goddess named Asherah, a mother figure deity known throughout the ancient Near East. Archaeologists have found inscriptions from ancient Israel that mention Yahweh and Asherah together in the same blessing. Not as rivals, but side by side. And that's what we're looking at today. So, in the 1970s, a team excavated a site called Kuntillet Ajrud. I'm probably saying that wrong. It is what it is. I'm going to say things wrong. Out in the northeastern Sinai Desert. The site dates to about the 8th century BCE, based on pottery and inscriptions found there. I had them on the screen, kind of scrolling through, so you should be able to see them. On the walls and storage jars, they found Hebrew inscriptions that said things like, I bless you by Asherah of Samaria and his Asherah. That's the common translation you'll see in a lot of textbooks. When epigraphers re-examined the letters, they noticed that the word his isn't actually written in the inscription. It could just as easily read, I bless you by Yahweh of Samaria and Asherah. Basically, it all comes down to one small mark on the pottery, how you interpret the final H, the letter H at the end of the word. Some experts argue that it's not necessarily his Asherah. The phrase might simply pair two deities in the same blessing, like saying Yahweh and Asherah instead of Yahweh and his Asherah. Others suggest that the phrase could refer to a coal object which was dedicated to Asherah, a wooden pole or stylized tree that symbolizes her presence. Either way, the key point stays the same. Yahweh's name and Asherah's name appear together in a blessing from ancient Israel. That tells us that ordinary Israelites, not some fringe sect, were comfortable linking the worship of Yahweh and Asherah together. It shows that early Yahwism was far more complex and blended than later monotheism would allow. So, okay, here's where it gets even more interesting. To understand why the Bible even mentions names like El Shaddai or El Elyon, we need to go back to a civilization that existed before ancient Israel, a Bronze Age city called Ugaritic. This isn't speculation, this is all in archaeology. In 1928, a farmer in northern Syria, which I'll be putting some things on the screen as I've researched them and found them, so you can see the proof of what I'm saying. Okay? In 1928, a farmer in northern Syria hit a stone tomb with his plow and accidentally uncovered what turned out to be the ruins of Ugaritic, which is modern-day Ras Shamra. Inside the ruins, that my air conditioner just turned on, you might hear it. It's really loud. It is what it is. Inside the ruins, archaeologists found two temples, one to Baal and one to Dagon, plus a palace and a library full of clay tablets written in a new cuneiform alphabet. When linguists decoded the script, they realized it was a previously unknown language, now called Ugaritic, a close cousin of early Hebrew and Phoenicia. These tablets date to roughly 1400 to 1200 BCE, during the Late Bronze Age. That means these writings are hundreds of years older than the earliest parts of the Hebrew Bible. So, what's on these tablets? These tablets describe the religion of the Canaanites. I'm hoping I can put them on the screen. The same culture world ancient Israel came out of, which If you watched my Genesis videos, you know that these people came out of the Canaanite religion. At the top of the pantheon were two deities, El, the father of God, and his wife Asherah, the mother of the gods. The Ugaritic myths portray them as a divine couple presiding over a council of gods with children like Baal and Anat. Here's the part that matters, Shirabil. El's title in these older texts are the same ones later used for Yahweh in the Bible. El Elyon, God Most High, and El Shaddai, God Almighty. I'm going to put the verses on the screen so you can see them. These titles weren't invented by Israel. They were inherited. Scholars Mark S. Smith, John Day, and Othmar Kill have shown that Yahweh's earliest worship directly continued this Canaanite system. Only later was it edited to focus on one God instead of many gods. So, if Yahweh absorbed El's role as the high god, he might have also inherited El's consort, Asherah. The Ugaritic tablets show that Asherah wasn't a later invention. She was already there, centuries before the Bible even existed. So, fast forward to about the 7th century BCE. By this point, Israel's religion has gotten messy. Local shrines everywhere, household gods, and yes, Asherah statues are in people's homes. We actually just talked about this recently in Genesis. How I think it was Rachel who had to possibly get rid of all her statues. See, from that she has stolen from her father. Enter King Josiah. He and his priests in Jerusalem launched what historians call the Deuteronomic reforms, a religious cleanup campaign to wipe out every competing tradition and make Yahweh the only legal God in Judah. And this is a speculation. The Bible itself documents this. It says, Josiah brought out the Asherah from the house of Yahweh and burned it. You don't remove something from the temple unless it was already there. That means Asherah's worship had been part of Yahweh's temple for generations. The reform described women weaving hangings for Asherah inside the temple. Even Solomon, it says, built high places for multiple gods, which I'll also put on the screen. Monotheism wasn't original. Archaeology backs this up. Before Josiah, Asherah was everywhere. We find thousands of clay tablets. The Judean pillar figures all over Jerusalem and Judah, dated before the reforms and disappearing afterwards. We find small altars, goddess statues, and inscriptions that link Yahweh and Asherah together. It's the equivalent of hitting delete on half the religion. Okay? They basically just tried to delete her completely. The Josiah's reform wasn't just about faith, it was about power. By outlawing every shrine outside Jerusalem, he forced all sacrifices and offerings into one temple under priestly control. That's centralization, the first state-run religion in Judah's history. So when modern believers talk about the original faith of Israel, what they're really describing is Josiah's rewrite, the cleaned-up state-approved version, where they completely deleted Asherah. Before that, Yahweh was not alone. He had company, and she was considered divine. All right, so here's something else interesting. Shout out to Nikosi766 for catching this one in the comments. They pointed out a verse that ties perfectly into everything we've been talking about. In Deuteronomy 16:21, it says, do not plant for yourself any tree as an Asherah beside the altar of the Lord your God. Some translations say wooden pole, others say the Asherah tree. Either way, it's a direct ban on planting or setting up a sacred tree for Asherah beside Yahweh's altar. And here's the problem with this. You don't outlaw something unless people were doing it. Obviously, they were doing it. So that verse is a leftover trace, a tiny fossil from when Asherah still stood right beside Yahweh's altar. When they erased Asherah, they erased the feminine. They erased the balance that had always been there in ancient religion. The idea of a divine mother beside a divine father. For centuries, people prayed to both. One represented justice and kinship, the other compassion and life. When that half was deleted, the divine became all authority and no tenderness. But people didn't forget, they just found new ways to describe her. A few hundred years later, Jewish writings start using the word Shekinah No. I'm going to put it on the screen because I'm probably not pronouncing it correctly, okay? The presence or dwelling of God. It's grammatically feminine. And the Talmud says, wherever Israel went into exile, the Shekinah went with them. I'll put that also on the screen for you. Later Jewish mythics, writing the Zohar, called the Shekinah the feminine aspect of God, the nurturing side that mirrors what Asherah once represented. In other words, she came back just with a new name. And then Christianity did the exact same thing. The Divine Mother returned, this time as Mary, the Virgin Mother of Jesus. She became the compassionate intercessor, the one believers could talk to when God felt too distant. At least that's what a lot of people believe, that this is what this Mary represents in the Bible. And look at what she's called: Mother of God, Queen of Heaven. That's the same title the book of Jeremiah used centuries earlier for the goddess people bake cakes to, the Queen of Heaven. So whether you call her Asherah, Shekinah, or Mary, the same pattern keeps showing up. The feminine side of the divine keeps resurfacing, no matter how many times organized religions try to suppress it. Humanity just can't accept a world ruled entirely by a masculine deity. There has to be balance, creator and nurturer, justice and compassion, male and female. So if you ever wonder where the goddess went after the Bible banned her, she did not vanish, she just changed names, languages, and symbols. She became the Shekinah in Jewish mysticism. She became Mary in Christian devotion. And she's still there. The same divine feminine humanity has always needed. So yeah, at this point, it's kind of hard to dodge it. Yahweh probably had a wife. If he didn't have a wife, he had someone next to him ruling in some capacity, in some way. Whether you read the inscription as Yahweh and as Asherah, or just Yahweh and Asherah, it doesn't really change what the evidence shows. In early Israel, Yahweh wasn't alone. The archaeology, the inscriptions, and even the older... In early Israel, Yahweh wasn't alone. The archaeology, the inscriptions, and even the older Canaanite texts all show that a mother goddess, Asherah, stood right beside Yahweh. Later editors and priests just cleaned it up. They rewrote the story, deleted her name, and called it monotheism, which we've seen just reading Genesis how not monotheistic it really is. What survived is the edited version, the one that made it into the Bible. But if you dig into the ruins, you find the older story underneath, the one where divinity wasn't just masculine, and creation came from balance, not hierarchy. Anyway, that's not me speculating, that's archaeology talking. You can ignore it, but it's still sitting there in the dirt. So if this kind of thing makes people uncomfortable, well, good. It's supposed to. History's supposed to make you think, not just make you feel safe. Facts don't fear your faith. So have a good night, everybody. I'll see you in the next one.